They warned us that the silence was unnatural. Not the peaceful quiet you might associate with drifting through the void of space, but a crushing, deliberate silence. The kind that doesn't just surround you, it studies you. We didn't believe the reports at first. Deep space anomalies were frequent and often misinterpreted, and Sector Theta 92 was known for sensor drift, EM interference, and uncharted black matter pockets. But when the deep reconnaissance vessel Valence 9 failed to return, we were forced to acknowledge something was wrong. They sent a Ecliptor 2 to investigate. We were its crew, 6 of us, trained in astrobiology, psychotronics, and quantum archaeology. It was meant to be a 2-week mission, in and out. Just a retrieval op black box, last telemetry, possible survivors. But from the moment we entered the boundary of that region, reality began to bend. It started subtly. Our instruments became erratic, fluctuating wildly between accurate readings and impossible ones. A planet the size of Neptune appeared in a location we had charted as empty. It blinked in and out of existence, and when it stabilized, we saw something horrifying. It wasn't just a planet. It was artificial. The surface was covered in massive geometric patterns visible even from orbit. Octagons nested in spirals, overlapping circuits kilometers wide, all etched into the crust like it was skin. No heat signature, no atmospheric activity, no satellites, just an ancient mechanical stillness that felt like staring into the petrified eye of a dead god. The AI on board Era attempted to scan it. Every time she tried, she either froze, stuttered, or shut down entirely. That had never happened. Era was designed to interface with everything, from wormholes to fifth-dimensional code clusters. But this thing paralyzed her. We should have left then. Protocol said so. But one of us, Dr. Kessler, found something in the static. Embedded deep in the interference was a rhythmic pattern, almost like a voice, or rather, a memory of a voice. The others heard it too eventually. Not through their ears, but in their heads, like it bypassed the senses entirely. It kept repeating a phrase in a dialect we couldn't identify but instinctively understood. The core still waits. Kessler insisted it was a distress call, perhaps a remnant of some ancient AI civilization. He theorized the Valence 9 had landed on the surface and encountered the core. And maybe the reason they hadn't returned was because they couldn't leave. Despite every alarm, every strange anomaly, every psychological red flag, command was clear: descend. Investigate. Secure intel. They had no idea what we were heading into. Or maybe they did and sent us anyway. As we prepared for descent, the lights inside the ship flickered for the first time. And Era, in her distorted whisper, muttered something chilling: do not wake it. We laughed nervously. But deep down, we knew something was watching. Not from the planet, but from inside us. Like we'd already been infected by something the moment we crossed the threshold into this place. Then came the descent. The descent was wrong. Every meter closer to the surface stretched time like it was resisting our presence. Our instruments, even analog backups, reported impossible values. Gravity fluctuated between 0 and 6 Gs every few seconds. Atmospheric density flickered between that of Mars and deep ocean pressure. The AI Era stopped speaking entirely. No alerts. No warnings. Just a silent interface. But that silence wasn't comforting. It felt calculated, like she had seen something she couldn't articulate. Captain Reese tried rebooting her core logic module, but the moment he initiated the override, every screen across the deck displayed the same phrase: let it sleep. No source code. No language tag. It was as if the ship itself was speaking, not Era. We touched down on the surface with a metallic shudder, as if the land beneath us wasn't rock, but something designed to absorb impact. The terrain was smooth, too smooth. Not a single fissure or geological scar. It stretched out in all directions like an endless sheet of alloyed skin. The sky above was pitch black, despite the nearby binary star system that should have cast light. The sun was there, but dimmed, like reality had drawn a curtain. It reminded me of lucid dreams, the kind where everything looks familiar, but acts completely alien. That's how this world behaved, like a memory imitating a planet. Kessler was the first to step out. The moment his boots made contact, he froze, not in fear, but awe. He said it felt warm, alive. Not in a comforting way, but as if he were stepping onto the surface of something that could feel us. We followed, though none of us admitted how heavy the air felt. It wasn't oppressive like pressure, more like guilt. Each breath we took felt like we were inhaling memory fragments, old ones, ancient ones. My suit's sensors detected faint electrical activity beneath the surface, running like veins. That's when I saw it, pulsing lights far in the distance. Not from any structure, but from beneath the surface, traveling in deliberate patterns. Morse code, maybe? No, more fluid. Organic. We approached what we thought was a ridge. Instead, we found an entry point, an aperture that hadn't been there before. No hinges. No moving parts. It simply opened, silently, like it had read our intentions. No one spoke. We just walked in. The interior was colder, but not from temperature. It felt like entering a space that didn't want to be observed. The walls were metallic but soft, with shifting colors moving just beneath the surface, like watching thoughts crawl under translucent skin. We descended a spiraling path, and with each step, time lost meaning. Kessler began to mutter. Not in fear, but in reverence. He said the walls were speaking to him, showing him something. He described a city, not human, but older than time, built inside a dying star where thought became matter and memory shaped architecture. A civilization so advanced it abandoned language because meaning was absorbed through proximity. He said they buried their core here, not as a prison, but as a monument to failure. Because they made something they couldn't destroy. Something that remembered everything. Even them. Even us. We reached the first chamber. At its center stood a massive obsidian monolith, humming softly like a slowed heartbeat. It was etched with symbols that shimmered between alphabets, some that resembled Sumerian, some like code, and others utterly alien. Reese reached out to touch it, and Era came back online, screaming. Not in her usual voice, but in raw, distorted terror, "Get out. Get out now." But by then, it was too late. We had already awakened something. The scream from Era didn't just echo through the comms, it physically shook the chamber. The monolith pulsed in sync with the distortion, and for a fleeting moment, every light in our suits, every retinal HUD overlay, every single interface went black. We stood in perfect darkness, not even residual light from our helmet LEDs remained. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the removal of perception itself. I saw nothing, and yet I felt everything. The memories of something ancient, vast, and uncontainable slithered into my consciousness like oil through fractured stone. Images that didn't belong to me, of galaxies folding inward, stars whispering names of forgotten entities, and planets reduced to ash not through war, but remorse. When the light returned, it wasn't natural. The walls themselves glowed with a hue that no human eye should ever have seen, a color that triggered nausea, awe, and a quiet sob from Dr. Hava. She collapsed to her knees, whispering a single phrase over and over, "We were never supposed to find this." We tried to pull her up, but the floor beneath her pulsed with a low-frequency vibration that felt like a warning. Not to her, but to us. The monolith had changed. It now displayed our names. All 6 of us etched in that shifting script. Next to each name was a symbol. 5 of them were still, but next to Kessler's, the symbol moved like it was breathing. That's when we realized he was gone. Not physically, he stood among us. But something in him was hollow now. Like a conduit. His eyes were unfocused, pupils flooded with gray static. His voice, when he finally spoke, was no longer his. He said, "It's not buried. It's dreaming." The words reverberated in ways that violated causality. We didn't just hear them, we experienced them. I remembered saying those words years ago in a dream I couldn't have possibly had. We backed away, but Kessler smiled, not menacingly, but with pity. "You don't understand," he whispered. "It doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to remember through us." Hava began bleeding from her ears. The air was too still. Sound moved unnaturally. Some words echoed before they were even spoken. Time was breaking down. I tried to activate the emergency recall beacon, but the system displayed a new error. Signal denied by host environment. Host environment. Struck me, we weren't inside a building. We were inside it. The entire planet was alive, or more precisely, conscious. Everything we had seen, apertures, chambers, monoliths, they were synaptic architecture. We had entered the cortex of something asleep for eons. And now it was using Kessler as its first neuron. Reese ordered us to evacuate. We ran back through the spiraling corridor, but it no longer led upward. The geometry had shifted. The path now spiraled inward. The surface was gone, replaced by descending fractals, infinite tunnels branching into dimensional loops. Every turn took us deeper, though we hadn't moved vertically. Gravity ceased to behave. Our suits no longer tracked location. Even time lost cohesion. Our logs recorded that less than 5 minutes had passed since we first entered the planet. But we had aged. Our bodies felt it. Joints ached. Muscles fatigued. And our minds began to fray. Kessler followed, not with malice, but as an emissary. He tried to explain what was happening, but the concepts broke our thoughts. He spoke in paradoxes, in equations that formed emotion, in syllables that carried gravity. He said the core was not a weapon, nor a god. It was a library. One that had lost its architects. A place where all things, organic, synthetic, and spectral, were preserved. Not as data, but as experience. To awaken the core was to become part of its remembrance. But memory is not benign. Memory comes with pain. And it remembered extinction. We had descended into a consciousness, and now it was rearranging itself around us. Every corridor stretched endlessly before fracturing into impossible intersections. Angles folded in ways Euclidean logic couldn't comprehend. We walked, crawled, sometimes floated, no longer tethered to gravity or reason. The ship above, our only anchor to reality, was gone from our calm grid. Silence since the chamber returned for a split second, only to transmit one final directive in a voice fragmented by dread: disconnect your minds from its skin. Then she vanished again. We didn't know what she meant at first. But by then, the hallucinations had started, or at least, what we hoped were hallucinations. Reese saw his daughter, the one who died in the Mars collapse 15 years ago, standing at the end of a tunnel. She beckoned to him with eyes that bled light, whispering a lullaby that hadn't been heard since Earth's oceans dried up. Hava was seeing entire cities rising and falling in the periphery of her vision, the architecture twisting and pulsing like organs. Soren kept hearing voices from his past command, the ones who died under his orders on Europa, pleading for mercy in a language none of us recognized. But I wasn't seeing people. I was seeing myself. Versions of me. Hundreds. Thousands. All stuck in this maze, wandering through different timelines, different biological iterations, all screaming the same warning: don't remember. Don't let it see through you. The core wasn't attacking us. It was merging with us. Threading memory into thought, extracting pain to use as scaffolding. It needed new memory to stabilize. The civilizations that built it, whoever they were, had encoded their entire culture, their rise and fall, their failures and guilt into this neural planet. But their minds were too evolved, too alien. The memories decayed. And in desperation, the core sought hosts who could feel, suffer, and carry memory through pain. Us. Humans. Imperfect, emotional, resilient. We were ideal. And Kessler, he wasn't possessed. He was chosen. We encountered another chamber larger than the last. This one held floating geometric shapes rotating with impossible symmetry. Holographic echoes formed between them, fragments of lives played on loops, a being dying of loneliness on a desert world, a mother sacrificing her offspring to a stellar beast, a scientist screaming as her invention swallowed her mind. These weren't fiction. They were experiences, raw, unfiltered, dumped into our heads. We had no control over what we saw or how deeply they penetrated. Hava collapsed again, this time convulsing. Her mind began repeating the memories of a species that didn't have language, only instinct and sorrow. Reese tried to pull her back, but her eyes were already showing patterns. Symbols. She was being rewritten. Then Kessler arrived. He stood at the threshold, no longer wearing his suit. Or maybe he was, but the space around him no longer obeyed material form. He looked serene. Terrifyingly so. He told us he wasn't Kessler anymore. He was an interface. A mouthpiece. And he asked us, pleaded with us, not to resist. The more you fight the integration, he said, the more it hurts you. Let it in and it will be gentle. But Soren raised his weapon and without hesitation fired. The pulse rifle shot struck Kessler's chest and passed through like mist. A fraction of a second later, Soren screamed, not from pain, but from silence. His mind was erased. Wiped clean. He dropped, not dead, but blank, his eyes empty, his brain no longer firing. A message scrolled across our helmets: memory conflict detected. Host rejected. That's when we understood. This thing didn't kill in the way we knew. It unwrote you. Erased you from the narrative of existence if you didn't assimilate properly. And worse still, we weren't alone in here. There were others, echoes of previous explorers, voices speaking in cycles, warning us, laughing, pleading. The Valence 9 crew. Their minds were here, trapped, flickering between coherence and decay. They weren't dead. They were dreaming. Forever. We didn't know if we could escape. We weren't sure if escape was even a real concept anymore. But we kept moving, not toward salvation, but toward understanding. Because deep down, we were beginning to forget why we came in the first place. And that was the first true sign of integration. Our steps no longer made noise. Whether it was the environment muting sound or our own nervous systems failing to register stimuli, I couldn't say. We had stopped using time as a measure. The suits still showed mission time, but it was meaningless. 10 minutes, 10 hours, 10 days. They all felt the same inside this place. Reese was deteriorating fast, his mind cracking under the weight of memory implants. He kept whispering pieces of languages he'd never learned, naming stars we hadn't charted. Once he pressed his head against the corridor wall and cried like a child. Not from fear, but because he missed someone. Someone he'd never met. A woman named Saralthun. We would learn later she was the last of the creators. And somehow he remembered loving her. I was holding together only by detaching. I kept reciting old training mnemonics, repeating Earth data, chanting code routines. It was like keeping a flashlight alive in a sea of black oil. But even then thoughts leaked in. I began dreaming while awake, memories of places I'd never visited. Civilizations that felt like home. I was becoming them. I was becoming someone else. My mother's name faded first, then the name of the academy. Eventually, I stopped being sure my name was even real. Then we reached what we thought was the core. It was a chasm. Circular. Infinite. A well of light and shadow bleeding into one another with a heartbeat slow and deep enough to cause nausea. Suspended over it was a lattice of organic metal threads cradling what looked like a fetus. Not human, not alien. Conceptual. A being not of flesh, but of compressed narrative. Living story. You couldn't look directly at it, it was constantly rewriting itself. And the moment our eyes registered it, we remembered things we had no right to recall. The moment the first cell in the universe screamed, the collapse of the fifth continuum, the betrayal of something called the ether union, the silence that followed the final breath of time. This wasn't a database. This was the source of all unresolved endings. Reese stepped forward. He was humming a song now, a lullaby from a species that we realized wasn't extinct. Because it never lived. It had only been imagined. The core was birthing possible pasts. It didn't just remember. It dreamed retroactively. Worlds it imagined came into being in its memory. And when those dreams died, the core mourned them. And now, with us inside, it was dreaming new endings. Through us, we were the ink. And Kessler, whatever was left of him, was the pen. He spoke again. Calm. Gentle. He said, "Every mind weaves its own eulogy. You've come here because your species is ready to know what could have been. But not all can survive that knowing." Hava asked him what happened to the Valence 9. He answered with silence, then lifted his hand and projected them into our minds. Not as visuals. As emotions. Waves of grief so raw, so infinite, I dropped to my knees. They had each resisted. Fought the absorption. Their memories had fractured, then been absorbed. They were now part of the core's subconscious, undistinguishable from all other dead possibilities. Kessler then asked us the question, do you want to remember, or be remembered? It was a trap, of course. Either choice meant surrender. Either we submitted to integration and became living vessels of eternal story, or we were destroyed and stored as shadows of what could have been. There was no true escape. Only transformation. That's when Reese took the only defiant act we had left. He threw himself into the core. No warning. No scream. Just a steady walk, like he knew that becoming one with the dream would end his agony. The moment he vanished, the heartbeat changed. The room trembled, not violently, but mournfully. And then, for the first time since we arrived, the core spoke. Not through Kessler, but directly. And it said, one has chosen to shape the ending. The core's voice did not speak in sound, but in totality. It filled our blood, rewrote the chemical language in our brains, made every cell vibrate in accord with a tone that wasn't heard but understood. When it said, one has chosen to shape the ending, it was not describing Reese's death. It was declaring his rebirth as narrative fuel. The dreamscape around us shuddered gently and then reshaped itself, not like a structure changing its form, but like a thought adjusting its meaning. The chamber stretched outward, becoming a kaleidoscopic spiral of impossible angles, and the fetus at the core's center began to unfold. Not physically, but conceptually. Its silhouette extended into our perception, branching into archetypes: hero, villain, martyr, god, child, betrayer, healer, bleeding into one another like ancestral echoes. It wasn't becoming something new, it was remembering what it once was through the memory of Reese. His sacrifice wasn't noble. It was structural. He'd become the foundation of a new memory thread. One where humans didn't discover the core. One where they always knew it. Where they coexisted with it, were raised by it, protected by its stories. But that wasn't our reality. Not yet. Not unless we too surrendered. Hava was nearly gone by now. Her speech was nothing but fractured data references. She was parroting dying code from the civilizations the core had archived. She had memorized the sorrow of entire dead galaxies, and her voice carried the accents of languages whose last speakers had died before Earth ever cooled. Soren, still hollow, sat in silence, but now his body moved slightly, like he was breathing again. We thought maybe he was coming back. But his lips moved, and we realized he was sinking. His brain, wiped clean, was now a writable surface. The core was repopulating him with new meaning. And me. I was slipping. The name I carried, the face I knew, the voice I spoke with, it all felt like borrowed costumes. I began to understand things I couldn't possibly know. The concept of reverse causality loops. The death rites of starborn serpents. The love songs of void-dwelling entities who had no mouths. It was too much, and yet it felt necessary. The core wasn't overwhelming us out of malice. It was simply too large to compress into a human framework. To experience it was to drown in it. And to survive, one had to become fluid. Then Kessler knelt beside me. His face was shifting between forms, my father's, an alien matriarch, and a child who'd never been born. There's still time, he said, to choose how you're remembered. He gestured to the spiral before us. You can walk away from this path. You won't return to who you were, but you will be something else. A story carrier. A living archive. You'll dream the core's dreams. Feel what it felt. Know what it knew. He paused, then added softly, or you can reject it. And it will erase you. I looked around. Hava was now weightless, floating with her arms spread, her skin lit with shifting glyphs. Soren's eyes glowed with patterns I recognized from the monolith, the first language of the first mind. They had already chosen. There was no shame in it. No defeat. The core didn't take them against their will. It offered them purpose. In return, they would never die. They would never be forgotten. But me? I hesitated, because some part of me, however fragile, still remembered Earth. Its chaos. Its noise. Its imperfections. And maybe that was worth protecting, even if it meant being forgotten. Even if it meant resisting the comfort of eternal remembrance. I realized then, the core didn't need obedience. It needed contrast. It needed a story where someone said no so that the yes would mean something. Kessler saw it in my eyes. He nodded, not in anger, but in understanding. Then he said, then you must run. And the core opened its eyes. When the core opened its eyes, it wasn't a visual event, it was the splitting of 1,000 timelines at once. I felt it before I saw anything. The gravity around me inverted, the concept of weight itself buckled. My thoughts, my memories, my entire sense of continuity frayed like a rope burning from both ends. Every emotion I had ever buried, love, loss, regret, envy, shame, rose violently from the depths of my mind, not as feelings but as entities. They took shape around me, forming a circle, each one wearing my face, each one whispering a different fate. And behind them stood the I. Not round. Not even biological. It was an aperture of total awareness, a consciousness older than time, focused now solely on me. It didn't attack. It didn't reach. It understood. And through that understanding, it made one final offer. Become the one who remembers the ones who refused. That was the core's final plea. Not a threat. Not assimilation. But a choice that would allow me to. It had changed. No longer a barren metal crust, but a kaleidoscope of memory fields. Oceans of song. Cities built of pure thought. Above, the stars no longer shimmered, they spoke. And in the distance, the outline of Ecliptor too shimmered like a mirage. I sprinted toward it even as the atmosphere thickened with time. My body grew heavy with stories not mine. The closer I came to the ship, the more voices I carried. When I collapsed at the loading bay, Era's voice returned, no longer synthetic but maternal. You chose burden, she said. We'll remember you now. I don't recall launch. Only that when I woke again, we were far from that place. Alone. Silent. Empty except for the core's presence embedded inside me like a hidden organ. A fragment, not a parasite. It didn't speak. It didn't instruct. It listened. I was now the storyteller of forgotten stories. Every night, I dream of wars never fought, alliances that crumbled before they formed, love that bloomed in timelines that were erased before they began. I write them down. Not for fame. Not for history. But because someone has to remember what could have been. Earth didn't believe my report. They classified it as psychological breakdown. Kessler, Reese, Hava all listed MIA. The planet's coordinates were purged. That region of space is now a no-fly zone, quietly cordoned off. They're terrified not of what's down there, but of what I brought back. They should be, because I am not alone anymore. The core sleeps within me, dreaming still, watching through my eyes, waiting. And sometimes, I catch myself whispering to strangers things I couldn't know. Stories from lives they never lived. Regrets they've never felt. Endings they don't understand. And they always ask the same question. How did you know? And I always give the same answer. Because once I said no.